Hey everybody, welcome back this week. Thanks for joining me. So, first of all, we wanted to start off by telling you guys again that next week we'll have no live stream. CG Spectrum will be having a open house event at the same time tomorrow or next week. And so, for those of you that are interested in learning more about CG Spectrum, please check back in this time next week, but with our go to our website link, cgspectrum.com/open day, and you'll find that there's a link there. You can register for this, and there should be all kinds of different talks about all aspects of CG Spectrum and what we do, and you get to meet a lot of people, and it should be a really fun event. So again, I will not be live streaming next week because of this event. But please, if you're interested at all in learning more about CG Spectrum and what we do, please check into this, this whole course, or I think it's a 2-hour event next week to kind of learn more about it. So, hey Big Lob, how's it going? So again, 1 second here. Okay, so again, no live stream next week, and please, register for this event and check it out if you're interested in learning more. I'll remind you guys again, kind of at the end, to check this out. So, commercial commercial done. So, anyways, the last few weeks we've been talking about designing FPS games, and we're going to continue today. We're just going to keep diving in a little bit deeper. Hi, Kyle. So the live streams for myself, my live stream next week is the only one that conflicts with this particular event that we're having. So all of the other live streams for all the other mentors will be there next week. And then I will continue the following week. I believe, let's see, that's the... Well, actually, we'll probably continue in 2 weeks. We'll see. We'll wait and see. No promises. I just realized the following week's my birthday, and I had plans on my birthday. So, but maybe I'll do a live stream, and we'll see what happens. But so we might continue again in 2 weeks on the 10th. For those of you that are following me. So, anyhow, so let's see here. So we are going to jump back into FPS design, and again, for those of you that are new here, hi Alexios, thanks for joining us again today. So for those of you that are new today, at least for this series, we're on the 4th episode now of FPS design. This design course can be good for anybody wanting to design an FPS. And then it's also for anyone in our design program at CG Spectrum that, is getting into their second term of the Diploma program, where you actually need to design an FPS. And so I thought it would be good to kind of, detail out, some of the things that are really difficult about FPS design. And so right now we are kind of just spending some time really brainstorming, and breaking down a lot of systems. And this is not meant to be everything goes into this game. Like, we have not decided what this game is going to be. We have not decided, the genres and things like that. So I'm not worried too much about, what's going into this game, right? This is really about right now more generic FPS design, and showing you guys just how complicated even a game that can be perceived as being very easy to design like an FPS, but how complicated these games really are to design. And they are definitely a lot harder to design than a lot of people realize. And so the first couple weeks we kind of spent a lot of time talking about some theory, and we talked a little bit about, we started to kind of outline this entire document. For those of you that are watching here, I can try to send you the link, but in the previous weeks we did link to this particular document. So if you want to go back and reference this for your own reference. If you're doing an FPS design or any kind of game design, really, this is a good document, I hope, for a lot of people, just for reference. And the principles that I'm using here, I call systemic design. And you'll see early in kind of the history of my live streams, there's a bunch of videos about systemic level design or systemic design in general. And those are very relevant to this. So if you're not kind of familiar with this process, you'll see that I jump around a lot. You'll see that I tend to kind of stay very high level, and then I dive deeper, as I get into the systems. And so I personally don't believe you can really truly design any one system in totality to kind of quote unquote finish. Not that game design's ever finished, but that you will, always be kind of working on game designs, and always be working on new stuff, but you need to know what to work on when to be a really successful designer. And that's why you'll see me often jumping around, because many systems are very interrelated. And for example, health and weapons. How do you understand how do weapons do damage and all that if I don't understand how I heal? And then how do I understand how weapons work if I'm not understanding the environment and the world that I'm going to be in? And how much cover do I have, for example, and the kind of gameplay. And then weapons also have to take into account a lot of movement. And then vehicles come into there. There's all this stuff. And so that's the challenge with game systems, is you can't just really sit down in a vacuum and say like, hey, I'm going to go design this thing today. Like, somebody can't just assign you, say, to go design a particular weapon, or, even just to say, go design the guns in the game. Like, it really isn't that easy, like, because there's so many nuances that have to go into just everything that builds up to that. And so I find myself, I bounce around a lot, and I do a little bit of this system, a little bit of that system, and I try to see how they all kind of interrelate. So you'll see that is happening a lot. So hi, Rogelio. Sorry if I did not pronounce your name right, but welcome. And so again, I'm going to kind of try to keep these sessions a little bit more, working. Keep in mind, last caveat here is that a lot of these systems, what you're seeing, we are going to spend 2 hours today together doing this. As a working designer, I would spend 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day working on something. And so the amount of time that we're spending even in a month together really is like a day in a real game designer's, job. And so, the amount of information we're going to get per day, and even through the series and stuff, I'm cutting corners and I'm kind of hyper accelerating things. I don't expect you to work at the speed I'm doing, and don't expect you to always cut the corners. Sometimes I'm cutting through this process that you're seeing today. So this process is not necessarily idealized into a real world working set of systemic design processes that I would normally follow. If I was working 5 days a week and 10 hours a day, that's a very different approach than doing 2 hours a week, right? So bear with me here, and please, again, everybody, thanks for joining, and ask questions if you have questions. And let's dive into this, and and again, if you have even just ideas and you have something I missed or ideas for anything, just please jump in and speak up. So last week we dived pretty deep into the health system. We spent most of the week last week talking about health systems and kind of what those are, and tried to kind of show the complexities of all the different things that go into health systems and healing and armor and damage and taking damage, and the related systems that all go into these various systems, the ways that damage can be modified, and the things that will modify how damage is done, even certain things like subsystem targeting, and how does that help, how does that work? Can I damage a leg versus damage the whole body? Those kinds of things. Things like armor and shields, vehicles and vehicle armor are kind of thrown there again. some of the stuff like vehicles, kind of belongs in its own section, right? Assuming you have vehicles. But in this particular case, the vehicles in this particular system are related to the health system and the player system. And so I chose to put them, for at least now, into this. When you are organizing these things, there's no right or wrong answers here. You really just have to figure out what works for you. How can you find things? And does it make more sense to say, like with vehicles, vehicle armor, or vehicle repairing, which is basically them having a health system, and things being fixed. Like, does that belong in its own vehicle section, or does it belong in like the health system? Does it belong in weapon systems? Like, where do these things belong in your organizational thoughts? And there's sometimes method to my madness. Sometimes it's just random. Sometimes I will start things in one section because I think it's kind of a small system and it doesn't deserve its own, huge system. And then later I may move it into its own system or its own section, like vehicles, as I maybe just want vehicles initially in my mind to be really simple, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, whoa, okay, vehicles are becoming this huge thing, right? And really then deserve their own section in my documents. And so one of the reasons I like to work in bullet points is I'm constantly, moving things around and reorganizing things. And, I've talked about this. I think it was in the second week of this. Also, some of the process stuff that's good for you to go back and look at if you're new to doing these, where, learning how to write, figuring out what things you want to write into what categories, so that you can go back and decide later where I want them. But by using headers and stuff, I can kind of see where the core systems are, and I can very quickly, jump down to health systems or whatever. So let's jump up to weapons today. We're gonna start to kind of talk about weapons, and really we're gonna talk about this in a fairly generic way. So this is we have to decide here, like, is combat in general. So in fact, let's I'm going to say that actually here that we have a section just for combat overview, right? And I think that's an important distinction here to try to get across, in that weapons in an FPS, while they may be important or they may be a big part of it, aren't necessarily the end all to be all. Meaning that you could have, hands, for example, do melee or do grappling or do other kinds of things that they're not related to, to weapons themselves, right? And so I think let's kind of try to organize this a little bit more, and to kind of understand, again, not in detail, but what are all the aspects of combat. So oops, the font is too small there. I'm attempting to keep things a little bit bigger so that you guys can read it on screen and it's legible here. So again, another tip and trick, which I mentioned before, but the more that I can see on screen at the same time, the better. And so I will quite often have things where even I'm doing this, where I'll have, on my larger monitor, I might have several things kind of going, simultaneously, and, be doing stuff like this so that I can, quickly go through and maybe read some stuff here and, and work on some stuff here, kind of thing. So again, don't be afraid, don't be shy to organize and rearrange these things, so that you have kind of maximum reading capability. So while this text is a little bit small right now for you guys to read, I would typically have, most of my on-screen text, probably, for me at least, in my vision, at this size. So All right, so what all is in combat here? Let's see. So we'll say weapons. I'm going to put, so there's some gray areas here, which I'll put TBD for now. And then I'll put this one for now under its own thing. One of the ones that's a little bit tricky for some people is magic. Magic itself is a very diverse set of systems, and obviously has more than just attacks. And so there's a bunch of stuff that can go. Magic might have weapons. You might have a staff or a wand or something like that that's specifically for instigating some sort of abilities within magic. So you might need an object to be able to do that. So so that's something you need to be thinking about. And I'll put. I don't know if you can put them as another thing. I'm going to add environmental. This could be, so, these are things, let's see here. Like exploding barrels. So things that are going to be used, in it. So it could be a variety of things that are man-made, to all sorts of stuff, right? So again, just kind of trying to figure out what are all these things that kind of go into combat, right? So the reason I'm differentiating this one would be so I'm putting melee kind of in its own category here, and then well, actually, it's not have it there. Let's see here. We'd actually want to put this as so the reason I'm separating these out is that when you're designing like weapons, you might have a melee weapon. So this would be, so these would be things that, I'll put in here a couple others, like, so these would be things that, under melee would be considered, melee weapons. And then, I'm going to put this one as its own. thing here. So again, you can see I'm kind of jumping around as my brain thinks about things and does stuff. But this top one would be, you know, just say hand to hand, and then but under weapons, you know, there's melee weapons. So there's swords as well as like secondary attacks. You know, like a butt stroke with your gun. You know, which some games do. Things like that. So there's, again, not necessarily clear distinction there, but I think these are melee. You know, melee using weapons versus melee uses using your hands. So, you know, and then there's things like items, you know, different abilities. So these could be, you know, all sorts of stuff. There's magic. And depending on your IP, again, things like that, like magic could be traditional Tolkien-esque, you know, I'm an elf and I can cast a magic, you know, ability. So I'm going to say, so, you know, these are just different kinds of things that can, you know, cast different types of attacks, you know, things like that. So again, you know, these are all things that are important. And then I'm going to put in here. So, you know, there's a lot of different stuff here, again, just within the combat system in general. I'm just kind of, again, showing, you know, I'm not going to break these down any farther, but just kind of showing, again, that that there's a lot of different things in here. So it's kind of a table of contents just to sort of show what are all these different things that go into an attack system. And I'm sure I'm missing some stuff here. But types of damage, so aiming and accuracy, subsystem targeting. Let's see here. I was just thinking of something else. Lock on, you know, so there's all sorts of stuff related to, you know, weapons and things like that are important to get. So anyways, I mean, this is, let's see here. I want to say, so, you know, it's important that you talk about offensive and defensive kind of together. So, you know, these could be things that are things like armor, shields, which we kind of talked about. Let's see. I'm drawing a blank right now. Anyways, kind of get the point though. There's just a lot of different systems in here that all kind of go together. And again, this is not, you know, an all-inclusive list. So you know, this is just kind of getting started on thinking about what are all the different types of weapons in the game, what are all the different types of things in the game that, you know, I need to be thinking about. They're like even So, combat while moving. We do have vehicles in there. What mounts under vehicles? Because they're kind of similar, but so we're going to divide this into the combat from vehicles, combat using vehicles, right? So this could be running over opponents. All right. Trying to think what is missing here. So, lots of different stuff there, kind of all related to combat. And again, this is kind of a more generalized system. I probably should organize it a little bit better, even where combat is kind of its own section, and then you could kind of come into some of these things and be kind of subsections. But then that gets dangerous as well. Again, the reason to organize this is for yourself and for your team. And probably for your team first, and then for yourself, right? That keeping the team efficient is the most important thing you need to do. So let's leave this for now and kind of jump down into, now we have a kind of a general overview, of combat. Let's jump down into weapons. All right. So again, there is absolutely no right or wrongs here, right? This is something that you've got to figure out what is it that you want, in your game. How do you want these things to be in there? And so again, you can't necessarily design all of this in a vacuum, or you're going to be kind of in trouble. So, for example, this is a really good one where FPSs, so first-person games, and third-person games often vary tremendously because the type of controls and how it's more direct action. I'm looking at my eyes, and so I'm seeing, exactly where my cursor is. That is where pretty much my bullets are going to go. If I have my reticle here, you're probably not going to get one that lands way over here, right? Now, that being said, you'll notice that most games and most reticles tend to grow over time based on, how accurate the gun is at that time period. And so, so something you have to kind of think about is, how and what affects accuracy in your reticle and things like that. So let me put this. So these are kind of all related, and they could be different for every gun. And so, but this kind of comes back to what kind of game experience are you trying to make, and that has a big impact on the decisions you're making. So you do need to kind of understand, what are these decisions I'm making. So, for example, I'm just going to combine these. So let's talk about moving. So on this one, I put using a low skill weapon. So this would be, if I have, if I'm playing a typical RPG, again, not a lot of games necessarily always have this, but it could be something where I have a certain accuracy or I have a certain use capability of that weapon, and by by using it, it's probably not going to be very good. It's not going to be very accurate. Versus if I'm a master with that weapon, I'm going to do a lot more damage. So, excuse me now. I don't know about you guys, but I'm very tired. Hi, Ecuadorables. So, thanks for joining. Hopefully, you enjoy the concept art streams. There is some overlap in game design and concept art, as you're probably aware. And if you want to get into games, even as a concept artist, the more that you understand, game design and some of the principles of what we go through and things like that, it never hurts to make you a better concept artist, because we, as game designers, have that catch-22 of, we need something to look really good, but we also need it to play really fun. And sometimes one or the other gets done 100% first, and then you're kind of like, okay, well, how do I adjust this thing? How do I tweak it? How do I make it, more fun, more interesting, right? And if you don't understand the concept art side of it, it can be difficult. So it's good for you as a concept artist to understand, what makes this thing fun. Like, what does the designer need? In the same hand, the designer has to kind of be able to work with you to say, like, well, what's it going to look like too? And so both kind of, again, have to be worked together. So don't underestimate the extra skills and advantages it'll be for you to know a little bit about game design even if you want to be a concept artist. All right, but unfortunately, today's conversation is not really world building. So as a concept artist, this stuff might affect you a little bit. It may not, but it just depends. But again, like, even designing enemies, designing weapons, things like that. Like, is this weapon supposed to look like it shoots really fast, or is it supposed to have lots of ammunition? Does it have lots of things on it? Is it super accurate? So it needs to have, especially if I'm doing a more realistic game, does it need to have like a big heavy barrel on it that, minimizes, its kick, and so it's not going to blow back on them as much, and therefore it's going to be a little, more accurate to shoot. So those are all kind of questions you have to sort of ask yourself. So let's go back up to the top here. Let's see, real quick. So just kind of, again, what adjusts and what affects the accuracy of a weapon. So we'll get back to this kind of in a minute. So let's start with the target reticle, stuff. I'm gonna, so again, like, trying to, make sure that people understand how these systems interrelate, is really important. Yep, anytime. Glad to help you out. So, in a first-person shooter, we are going to predominantly have a slightly easier thing in the targeting and aiming systems, but it's still, don't trivialize, how hard this can be. I'll make a note here. So, this is something where, when you're working on, targeting and aiming systems, you have to be very conscious of what the platform is, and kind of try to understand that there's, lots of things you need to help the player do. So, So this problem is becoming, I would say, more solved. It's a little bit, more understood now, I guess, as an industry compared to, say, back in '99 or whatever when we were working on the Halo, games like that. Where I remember the Halo team had several people working for a very long time just to get the targeting, and controls working right, because you couldn't just the analog sticks move the targeting cursor at kind of a certain rate, and you can vary that rate depending on how much you're moving the joypad stick. But that being said, it was really easy to move it too far and then move it back too far, and then and you have to do this to get back, and then finally you're oh, okay, now I can shoot this guy, right? And so that was one of the reasons. With the exception of GoldenEye 64, the vast majority of console-based FPSs weren't really all that good. And a lot of that was the controls just didn't feel right. So people just thought we can mimic, keyboard and mouse and put in there and expect the controls to work, and it didn't. You're always overcompensating. That was a big problem. So, So your targeting and aiming systems, again, on a traditional FPS are going to be a little bit simpler. Reticle, let's see. Actually, no, they're reticle. So you're targeting reticle in the center. However you guys are doing that in an FPS, you need to kind of understand, what that means. So, for instance, here. So the games where you have something flashing red, when it's taking damage or when it's in range, things like that, or something turning green because you're accurate and you're in range, you're over a target that you could hit right now. So there's a lot of information that we give through a lot of these systems. So you need to be kind of aware of those. Now, the lock-on system, so these are typically needed for third person, but again, might be something you need for an FPS, in some way, shape, or form. I have seen FPSs that you could lock onto things, then it would strafe you in a circle. I can put another note. So for those of you who don't know, strafing is typically when you go back and forth. A lot of games will put a dedicated strafing button in, and it's basically designed. If you look at it from the top, where I'm going flat and parallel to where I am now, and it just allows me to move side to side a lot faster, a lot easier. Now, where strafing gets really interesting is that a lot of the strafing games now put it as a circular thing around, with the enemy character might be in the center, and then there's a circular thing that's a certain distance away from that player character. And when I start strafing around him, now I run in a circle, with my at least my gun, my target, my body and everything, always just constantly keeps following, the guy on the inside that I'm fighting, and so it's that helps, quite a bit. Excuse me. So lock on, similar problem. In general, and that it can also affect things like, I'll just put a note here, like, so I don't know if we're going to have missiles, but, like, it can have similar problems where, again, you need to have a weapon, or you need to have something that, say, shoots out, and it's going to eventually, like, hit a target. But, kind of like you think about, like, the real U.S. military or real militaries will often, there's a guy whose job is, like, the lasers can be in a lot of different forms, but basically you can have a laser and you point the laser at something, the laser paints the target, and then the bomb comes in a lot more, missile comes in a lot more accurate. So I've seen some games use lock-on, for that kind of a mechanic as well. So I'm putting lobbying here. So, lobbing weapons, I like throwing a grenade, things like that. I also put so these can be things where, it shows an arched UI element. I'm sure you guys have all played games where you see it lob over and you see like a arc show up, and depending on how you move your cursors, that could throw a little farther, throw a little shorter, things like that. So that can be a lot of fun. I'll have another one on here just for shits and giggles. It would be actually, I'll put it so you kind of just get a sense of, just the base systems there. There's quite a few different types of systems. And then I would even say, so other types of systems. Oh, let me think what other kinds of systems would be in here. spraying, like a flamethrower. There's a bunch of different types of systems that you might target a little bit differently, right? And so again, it's up to you to kind of figure out like what are those systems and what I want to do with it. All right, 1 second here. Switching chairs. All right. Let's see here. So, accuracy systems. How accurate is the there's a weapon, it's moving while you're shooting fast, using, you don't have high skills on a weapon. Let's see, it's okay, so there's a lot of different ways to understand how accurate a weapon is. Rate of fire is one. The faster you shoot. And I'll even put a note here. I'll use the word move kind of in. So, this can be something where the weapon is, again, very typical machine gun behavior, boom, 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 as I shoot, right? So the faster, if I just shoot boom, 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 it's going to be doing this, right? If I go boom, 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 especially a big, heavy, gun, the bigger the gun, traditionally, just like in real world, the more that you're going to kick back on it. And therefore, the first round's fairly accurate. Second round's a little bit less accurate. Third round's really inaccurate. And then by then you may be missing altogether or whatever. But again, that would be varied by weapon type. So, for example, a 223's recoil is a lot less than, a 308's, which is a lot less than a, 50 cal, right? And so, that's what's funny to me when you watch movies like Rambo and stuff, and you'd see him, at the time, he was using the M60 machine guns, which are 308 caliber. And I've shot those before, and they kick like a you-know-what. And they're pretty, for an average person, you have a hard time controlling them. And so when Rambo was doing his, holds one in each hand, and he's shooting like this, it was like, yeah, right. Even with all of his muscles, I don't think you could hold a machine gun at full automatic with that kind of things just, accurately. So... Lexios, there might be ways to affect weapons recoil. Yes. In fact, I'll use the word recoil here. So yes, so a lot of guns have what's called a compensator on them. A compensator basically is kind of a weight. If you imagine your gun in the barrel, they put kind of more weight here so that when the gun goes to kick back, if this is really light, it's going to kick back super fast. If this is heavier, then it might kick back like that. So those kinds of things. Let's see. So what affects accuracy, player movement. Other ones could be, I just thought of here is so again, I'm not trying to make a perfectly accurate list because every weapon is a little different. But yes, there is lots and lots and lots of ways to take these systems, for you. And so, for example, and again, I'm talking right now in this particular case, real world. Obviously, in sci-fi, fantasy, whatever, you can kind of do whatever you want to do, right? But the question is, how do all these things balance out? How do you balance all these things with a particular weapon? When you're trying to compensate, for how much damage it does, how much recoil it does, what its rate of fire is, and all these things, and how do you going to, adjust that and stuff. So that's just something that's really important. And yes, Alexis, right, there could be different things that would affect recoil, good and bad. So there is trade-offs in some real-world weapons where a particular weapon... So let's just take a sound suppressor. A sound suppressor, or sometimes it's referred to as a silencer, which is actually more of a Hollywood term. A military or real, gun enthusiasts would call them sound suppressors because they lower the sound, but they don't eliminate it altogether. So a silencer makes it sound like it's silent. It's just, some people, that's a vernacular they've used, but just use that as an example, just so you guys understand what I'm talking about. So a sound suppressor is something that, on a gun you screw on. Typically, it could be permanently mounted, but you typically would screw it on to the end of your gun, and it sticks out really far. And what that thing does is it takes all that air that makes all the noise and it dissipates it in a broader fashion, and therefore it doesn't come out all in one big, and make a huge amount of noise. And so on one hand, you would think that I'm reducing the noise of my gun by some significant amount. So you'd think that would be something I'd always want. So you'd say why don't all guns, or especially military, police, whatever, why wouldn't everybody have that? Well, the problem is that extra bit of the way a suppressor takes the gases and channels them, so that whether it's that last 6 inches or the last couple feet, however it is, a sniper rifle or something might have a pretty big sound suppressor on it. But as it goes through that sound suppressor, it actually destabilizes the bullet a little bit. And I won't get into all the details, but that makes it less accurate. So if you're, again, being real, and I'm just using this as just one example, to Alexis's point, yes, something that gives you sound suppression and makes it quieter, which may not alert the AI and therefore might be better for stealth gameplay, might also reduce the total range of the gun, might reduce the accuracy of the gun, and have other negative side effects. So don't assume that all these things necessarily... that's always the fun part in game design, is balancing the good and the bad, right? So you want to have 2, 3, 4 good things and maybe 1 or 2 bad things, and the player's I don't know if this is the perfect thing, but I really want to do X on this weapon, and therefore I'm going to take the hit by also getting something bad in that. So there's lots of things that can affect accuracy. And again, you need to be careful. I'll put a note here. I'm going to put this in red to kind of call out. So the point is make it fun, right? And so that's something that's important to kind of understand the distinction on here, in that, on one hand, I'm using real world examples just because they have something that's more relative that you would probably understand a little bit better, but you also have to understand that isn't always fun, right? And so as game designers, that's one of the balances that we have to try and find, right? Now, let's get into this kind of types of damage. Again, I'm moving kind of fast, but I'm just kind of trying to give you guys an overview and just to kind of show you that there's lots of things there. And actually, one of the things I didn't talk about yet, let me do this before we go farther, is weapon stats. So there's lots of things can affect a weapon and can kind of help you determine what might affect it, right? So let's list some of the stats, and to kind of understand, like, well, isn't just a gun, and I want to actually put here to even start with, okay, so let me list just some example categories really quick and kind of get a sense for these. So again, like, melee weapons would be, one of these things. Let's say pistols. And I'm sticking with like industry standard right now just to prove a point. And I'm using real world examples and not trying to get into like sci-fi fantasy kind of things, right? Rocket launcher. So, oops. Oops, if I can spell. All right. So, why are the categories important first before we get into stats? Because these are closely related, right? Each of these has a different function to the player, i.e., a different set of generalized stats. And with some exceptions and with some things, there's always guns that try to. Oh, let me put in here. Shotgun, just, again, very, very, very standard industry stuff. So in most players' minds, melee is obviously very, very close range, right? It could be hands, could be a knife, sword, whatever that is. That that could be super simple system, could be a really elaborate system. So I'm not going to get into that right now about which is which. Now, pistols typically are shorter range. And they have good, accuracy, there, but they're, don't have big, magazines, and they're kind of, seen as something that's more close quarters, right? A submachine gun is a step above that. It's kind of a pistol with a bigger magazine, with a longer barrel, slightly, and those are designed, also more for CQC kind of close quarter combat, again, not incredibly accurate, And then a machine gun, like an M4, AK-47, these would be, pistols and machine guns are probably the most common guns you would see on the street. These are typically what you would see in most movies, things like that. Doesn't mean there's not some machine guns or whatever. There's heavy machine guns. A heavy machine gun could be, like I mentioned earlier with Rambo and an M60. These are typically designed to be a much higher caliber with a high rate of fire. They are typically designed to be a two-man team, at least in real-world military. They shoot, very fast with bigger bullets, but they overheat really quickly, and they have, other downsides to them, big and heavy and don't carry as much ammo and stuff. Sniper rifles shoot very slow, but, have high accuracy, right? Shotguns shoot wide and have knockback. Rocket missile launchers or grenade launchers, and I'll even put a couple different ones there. Those shoot out a projectile, which then does something when it hits. Grenades could be thrown, could be, grenade launcher, like on a rifle, can, put it in, shoot it much farther. But same general kind of principle. And then, flamethrower shoots out a big, thing of stuff. So, again, this is a very traditional list, right? If you're doing a modern day gun list. But what's important to these and why using these can be really important is that anybody who's kind of a gamer, anybody that's military, whatever, they're going to know what the functionality of all these things are pretty quickly. Now, if you try to just make a whole bunch of sci-fi weapons, you can get into this problem of like, well, what's that thing that I want to do, right? So if I'm playing a modern day game, I know that within a little bit of fudging back and forth, that most of these things have a role, a job to do. I'm going to use them in particular ways, particular places, all that kind of stuff. And so I don't need to really think about it. I know, like, I'm not going to take a sniper rifle inside a house with me and try to be doing like close quarters combat with a big long sniper rifle. Like, that's not going to work, right? I mean, in a pinch, if that's all you had, yes, post-apocalyptic zombie game, maybe. But, again, each one of these has different uses, with a machine gun being kind of the most generalized, versatile in the middle, with everything else, fading out to specialized purposes beyond that. And again, this is not an exhaustive list of weapons. This is just trying to illustrate the fact that the categories of these things are really important for you to understand. And you got to remember, especially if you're doing a game that's modern military or something, like with me on Rainbow Six or a game like that, the amount of people, when they're looking, most people are not min-maxers, right? So if I compare like an M4 rifle to an AK-47, for example, to an FNFAL or whatever it is, those are the top three most popular guns in the world. For the most part, they're all machine guns, right? They all have similar-ish kind of rates of fire. They all got ammo that's kind of close enough the same size, meaning like they don't function like a shotgun, right? They shoot out things, they shoot out bullets. They've got magazines or clips that hold 20 to 30 rounds in them, and they all serve a purpose, plus or minus some range. And so if you're a min-maxer, each one of those guns can be very unique, and you're like, ooh, well, I would never use an M4 in that situation. I'd always pull out the FN, if I had the choice or whatever, right? So like hardcore players are going to understand those nuances and want to utilize them. Most casual players don't. And so categorization of these things helps you. And I don't care whether you're doing sci-fi, fantasy, whatever, you need to put everything in these categories so that people understand what the use case is for each one of these things, right? So that's the whole point of like knowing like, when am I going to use these things? What is it used for? What's the pluses and minuses of all these things? And it's more important to have, in my opinion, in most games, more categories of things that make sense than just say having more weapons. So if you just put in, let's just say you put in 25 machine guns, and then you put in one pistol and one sniper rifle. Like, how many people are going to really know those 25 machine guns and even care? Are they just going to pick up the first one they pick up and then not even care about picking up the other 24, or not even knowing when to switch because now they're confused when, they pick up an AK-47 and they're expecting some different functionality, and then the functionality is like, no, it's just another machine gun, right? It's 2% better here, it's 2% worse over there, it's 2% better, on this, and so on and so forth. And so for a really hardcore player, they'll be like, oh, I really, really want the AK-47, and so they'll go they'll go get that. Versus a more casual player is more likely to understand that, like, okay, sniper rifle is great for long range. A shotgun is great for shorter ranges, but a shotgun also provides pushback. So when it hits somebody, because there's so much force momentum, it tends to knock them flying backwards for example. I mean, you don't have to, but that's the typical thing with a shotgun. Probably knocks you over, knocks you down, knocks you back, right? So, each of these things can have a purpose that you might need in that particular case. And even like a sniper rifle, like an M4, which is a 223 round configured as a sniper rifle. It works. Like, it's semi-accurate. You can hit probably mile-ish with that. But you get into a really good sniper rifle, and you're going to, like a 50 cal, and you're going to hit whatever the 50 cal, I'm not sure. I think it's in the 3 to 5 mile range. But the bullets are so flipping big on a 50 cal that you could shoot it probably through a car, through the engine block, and do a lot of, really crazy damage with it. Versus, a 223 at that distance might bounce off of you if you shot it a mile and a half. Probably wouldn't, but exaggerating that a little bit. But they're not a very strong gun. So even though both guns might be crossing over in their usage, they're really not necessarily optimized for that. Let's talk about weapon stats. And these are important to, again, think about these categories and stuff. So, how accurate, do you want the gun to be? So magazine size, how many bullets can the thing hold, right? How many different shots could it have? And, and again, and I'm using the word bullets, but it could be, for instance, a law rocket, or a missile launcher might only have one shot and you have to reload each time, versus a machine gun might have a magazine of 50, right? And so those are important. So damage amount, that might vary. And we'll get into damage, damage types down below. But again, like a grenade or something might have, let's just say it has 100 points of damage total, but the radius and the distance you get away from it and where it is, you don't necessarily get 100 points to that target. It might vary over time, distance, and other factors. So, so you can't assume that the damage amount, is fixed. It could be DOT damage over time. So a thing like a flamethrower or something, if I just keep and I'm spraying you, right, that could be damaging you over time. And so it continues to damage you. Laser could do the same thing. For example, if a laser stayed on you, a bullet hits you and does damage and then stops doing damage in theory, versus other weapons could keep damaging you, and stuff like that. So, reload time. How fast and how long does it take me to reload, right? I'll put a note on here too. Well, let's put this under its own thing. So, we'll put it here, and so, secondary attacks. Does it have a grenade launcher? a lot of guns have a primary and a secondary attack, right? So that's an important factor, in them. And I would actually put in here. So this is, let me see. I'm just going to put I'm going to change this a little bit. Availability of ammo, cost of ammo. Can you choose or change? Like, so normal arm penetrating, just totally drawing a blank on the other ones. Phosphorus rounds are, start fires, things like that. So anyways, lots of different choices there if you choose to go that route. This is pretty hardcore feature and not necessarily something that you're going to want to do, but just showing that, the ammo, both the availability of it, like, so this is, I'll make a note here. I'll put another one here. So, ammo, different types, reload times. Let's see, how about, let's see here. Other effects. Put an example here. Can be shot underwater, right? I'll put considerations here. Also, I'll put so some guns, whether it's it's more commonly seen in melee weapons like swords and things like that. But it could also be done in, and seen in a gun and things like that, where the certain guns with certain stats, with certain player stats, or all these things can lead to some kind of a crit. So you might have a random chance of like doing a lot more damage on a particular hit, and that's part of the damage system. So we're not going to really get into that because that's not necessarily a factor of the weapon itself. But certain weapons are going to have a higher chance of being able to do that, if it's done right. So that's something to think about. Let's see here. I'll even say, so size and weight. So, in inventory, for example, a really big sniper rifle, depending if you had like a grid-based system like Fallout or something, where a gun takes up a certain number of does each gun take up a single slot, or does it take up like a certain number? Let's say it takes up 6 or 8 slots, right? And you're like, okay, do I want to carry this thing around, and stuff. So that can be a factor determine if you really want this gun or not. Beyond reload time actually is change the weapon time. Recovery after shot time. So the recovery after shot time is, can I go boom, 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 boom? Or, in the case of a shotgun, it's boom, boom, and like how, so that is a little bit of a factor of rate of fire, but it's, can have some other factors in there too. So it's important to get there. Let's see. So we have accuracy, magazine size, ammo, weight, grits, noise. I'll just put suppression, just making a note there. And let's see. I would also say like type of shot. So we'll get back more into this deeper later, but these are anyways, this is not an exhaustive list, but you can see that even on a single weapon, you could have a tremendous number of different variables that you need to take into account for, and so you just want to kind of figure out like what are all these different variables there, and what matters to you, right? And then and I'll put a note here too, just. So, how to categorize things into functionality, how to balance these, that kind of stuff, right? So there's a bunch of factors, again, that, like I was trying to say earlier, like with an AK-47 versus an M4, they're basically, to a layman and to a lot of people, they're exactly the same gun, right? They're going to be very different than a rifle and a hand grenade, right? And so you definitely need to understand like what the difference is, there. Okay, moving right along here. Types of damage. All right, so I'm not going to... So what's important to understand is that each weapon can damage you in different ways, right? And so it could do point damage, which is basically something that hits you and it stops, and it just does that damage. It can be damage over time, meaning it could be causing poison or other kinds of things. area of effect, streaming damage, again, flamethrower, something like that, you know, a laser that continues to damage you over time, you know, just stuff like that. So not necessarily every gun will damage you in the same way. I'll even just put in some things like, actually, this would be a good one to, I'll put up here as well. But armor penetration would be another factor. Can it penetrate armor? You know, is another type of stuff that could go under ammunition. Okay, I guess I have it. But again, just, you know, you know, and so on. So, anyways, but the types of damage are really important to get right. And, you know, you want to understand that not necessarily everything, you know, in a modern day first-person shooter, a lot of stuff is going to do point damage. Oh, one thing I did forget here, I think. Hold on a sec. I did forget was... And then I also want to say so what the spread is basically, you know, does a gun go straight? So a typical gun, like a machine gun, would just fire straight from a single round. A shotgun would fire in a cone. You might have something, you know, again, cone could be variable. You know, a claymore mine or something like that might fire out of higher range. A shotgun might be like this, but again, it's going to go out over distance, and you know, the cone can go out, you know, to a certain point based on the range, right? And then a radius would be a circular area for its, you know, for its effect. So that's also kind of part of it. But you can see how I jump around. You know, it's just one thing will kind of lead to another, and, you know, you kind of, you realize you maybe forgot something. So, and remember that, you know, that we talked about last week, and if you haven't watched that, go back and watch it because they're related. The damage systems and how we take damage, how we heal, all these things are really important, right? And that they're all kind of interrelated. So you have to think about, like, how am I going to damage you? And then how are you going to get out of that? And how are you going to heal out of that, right? And that can be, you know, an important part, you know, of the game. All right. I guess this is also kind of, you know, relevant, but again, like, we've talked about some of this, so I'll move through it fast. You know, streaming, lobbed, a moving projectile. These would be famous in, like, Doom or something like that. So you might have, well, actually, another stat would be, so projectile speed as well is another stat that you want to be thinking about. So in a game like Doom, they would do things where, you know, you shoot a fireball and the fireball, you know, going like this, right? And you might have a chance of jumping over it, dodging it, you know, those kinds of things and stuff. So that's a big factor in the kind of game that you're trying to build and the kind of experience that you're trying to build, right? And you want to know, like, what you know, do I want this bullet to go out instantaneously, you know, and kill you or not? But again, keep in mind that if I have, I don't know, 500 feet per second on a gun versus 1,000 feet per second for a gun, instantaneous versus almost instantaneous, again, maybe hardcore players are going to care, but casual players aren't. So, you know, it doesn't matter necessarily a lot, but, you know, it gets into some crazy stuff that, like, we'll get into a little bit later, but I'll put here just a note of, I'll talk about this really quickly because it's related to that, to that factor. But basically, if you have any kind of, especially multiplayer, but you could technically in single player have some similar problems where there's always going to be a little bit of lag in a system, right? And lag can be caused by a lot of different things. It gets exponentially worse on multiplayer games, especially MMORPGs, people with low ping times, things like that. So this is predominantly a multiplayer problem. That's why we're not going to get into it too much. But this can also be perceived as a single player problem as well. And one second. Just remembered something that we'll do next. That's related to that. So again, brain's working in many ways here. So hit detection and hit accuracy. I'm sitting here with my rifle. I'm following you, and I shoot. But now, again, that bullet, if we're tracking it through real physics and we're tracking things that way, and I'll even put a note here of physics or not, because that's another kind of related things to this. Actually, I'll put this under hit detection because it's kind of related. But basically, how accurate is this thing going to be, right? So I'm trying to do a headshot on you, and I think I got a line, and I try to hit you in the head. Well, there's all these different factors that are coming into play, like how accurate is my gun? Like, was my gun actually, on the head in the right place? Like, maybe my sight, my reticle covered it up just a little tiny bit. I mean, I might have been off just by like a 1/16 of an inch, and whatever. But in my mind, like, I pulled the trigger, I headshotted you, and then you just keep going and you didn't even take any damage. And you're like, I've seen people throw controllers and get so upset about that because they thought they killed you and then they don't understand why. But, like, even if we're at 100 meters and I shoot, depending on how accurate the simulation is, like, that bullet starts traveling. And even if that's 500 meters per second, this could take, let's just say it takes 1 second to travel here, right? Well, in that 1 second, all that guy's got to do is move just a little teeny tiny bit, and I miss, right? But again, the player, one player is all aligned. He thinks he pulls the trigger, and he thinks he hits you, but just in that, you're running like this, and he's tracking, and boom, he thinks he gets you, and then he misses, and he's confused. He's like, I shot you in the head, and that could just be a matter of physics and a matter of just, the timing and the bullet trajectories and all these kinds of things. So sometimes some of the games will devolve into kind of a instant hit system where they don't try to track the actual bullets. They don't try to track certain things, and they use other systems that are a little bit more, I won't use the word accurate, but more perceived as accurate, in the way that they're hitting you and things like that, because the players might perceive that there was cheating going on or that the game systems aren't right, when really the game systems could be 100%, 1000% accurate to like real world stats and all these kind of things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that aligns with the player's perspective and the perception of what he feels like he should be hitting, right? And so that's some of the problems. And this kind of comes back to the target and control stuff I talked about earlier, where especially if you get into like joypads and and things, but keyboard mouse kind of the same thing. Of again, somebody's running, I'm trying to shoot them, and we have to as game designers decide, well, how close is close enough, right? Like if they get okay right here, they can hit. They're not perfect, but they're close enough as long as the game rules are consistent and things. And so some games will use like snapping and stuff. So if I'm, if I got my targeting reticle and I get it really close, like here, it's not quite on my head, but it's really close. As soon as I get close enough, it snaps. And this happens over a frame, so the human eye is not picking it up. But quite a few games will have what we call aim assist and things like that, in order to make it more accurate for you and more likely to hit. So this is something that you definitely have to think about in your games, because each kind of weapon can have different types of problems there. Let's see. And this is kind of for an FPS, but basically, so things like firing from the hip. I'm holding down here and basically so typically you're spraying out a bunch of fire and stuff like that. Blind fire was typical, like we use this in Rainbow Six Vegas. It could be around a corner, it could be over the top of something or whatever, where basically I'm shooting without looking. And so that's another kind of by the hip, sorts of types of viewing. But depending on the lock-on system and various factors, you could determine the how accurate that really is. The most typical thing would be your iron or fixed sights. You're going up and you're there. I'll even put this as just there's an on-screen reticle there. But that's kind of the more common thing. And then aiming, that's where I put the gun up, and I'm a lot more accurate. I'm looking through the thing very accurately, and typically, games, especially like do World War II type games, things like that. You see that you kind of like one's kind of shooting down here, the next one's kind of up here, and there's a lot more accuracy there. I'll put a note here as well. Oops. So, in some sniper rifles, in some games that try to be a little bit more accurate, you might even have to hold another button. So I'm looking through my scope, and I have to I hold my breath, and that brings my accuracy even more there, because even just general human breathing will add some level of inaccuracy to it. Oops. And I'll put this under scopes as well. So scopes, I'm just for right now, very, very simple. There's many types of scopes out there. And so right now I'm just throwing them into long range, short range. Red dots are not very accurate, but they're designed for run and gun. These are... But again, the sight and view and how we're shooting the guns, has a lot to do with that. Something else we didn't talk about. Let me add it in here just because it's... All right. So this is something else. The multiple guns. In some games they do allow you to have like your two pistols, and you can shoot them separately. And I might be able to put a machine gun in a pistol or whatever. So this basically means that so some guns and items are. So in other words, like I could have a riot shield and I could have a gun, things like that. But the player has to choose which combinations he's going to want to do. Let's see. We kind of talked about damage systems up here. But let me move this up. So there's lots of ways to do it. I'm just going to simplify it because we're running short on time today. Just there's lots of different ways to damage the player. Do you damage their health bar instantly? Does it hit them and then slowly go through? So we've kind of talked about some of this already, but there's lots of systems there. So melee attacks. Oops. So again, lots of different types of melee attacks. This could be an entirety, entirely big, set of stuff here, right? Like what kinds of things. So let's say here's put these under just bladed. So weapon melee attacks will be again like a butt stroke, something like that. So these are all things that are just kind of designed to, but again, like any kind of like fantasy game, this could be there's a lot of different factors there, right? And then things like attack speeds and stuff like that become a lot more important, on something like that. So you need to be more aware of those things, right? So, I'm not going to get super into melee attacks. These can get this whole system. Melee alone could be an entire combat system in and of itself. And so that's something just to sort of be aware of, as you get into designing, an FPS. These are not necessarily things that you want to go, in this case, an FPS. We're not going to get too deep into this because I'm assuming that with FPSs, you only want a really, really, really basic melee attack, that we're not going to do first-person martial arts. I mean, some games have done that, but in this particular case, we are, in the true intensive purposes, doing a first-person shooter. So let's, we'll kind of move on from these things quickly, but that does not necessarily mean that, again, you couldn't have stuff there. Now, I think we had, let's see. Well, let me put a special category here. Um, And just to be clear too, like you could be doing, if you're doing a historical game, like a bow and arrow is really not all that different than stuff. But you might then say like, okay, um, let's see here. So like lobbying, let's just put another one in here. Just could have a unique targeting system. Some games like you pull out kind of more similar. Where I pull it back and there's a certain amount of strength, and then I go up and down and can adjust it. So again, not going to get too deep into this, but just recognize that like even bow and arrows could be, a different type of weapon there. So magic attacks. So, again, like magic attacks could be magic weapons. You know, so again, so magic device would be like a wand or a staff, something like that. All those kind of things. So there's lots of different things in magic that's different, that can be a little bit different, right? And let's see here. Special abilities. Let me see if I can think of anything else that let's see, slow motion attack, fixed weapons. There could be other stuff like, oops. Oh, what was it called? Just drawing a blank right now on the name of it. What was the accuracy? There was one of the John Woo games where they had like a freeze frame. I don't know if anybody's here and watching and awake right now, but Stranglehold, we were doing it, and they had like a whole like bullet time. Could be another like special thing where I get a special ability and I suddenly, slow-mo attack. So, there's all kinds of different things like this that can go into my weapons, my attacks, skills and abilities. things like that. There's not necessarily right or wrongs here. It's just a matter of like what does your game want, right? So let's see here. Oh, we did have weapon stats here. Let's see. I think. Good enough. I mean, I think we covered most of that. So anyhow, so that just kind of shows, like, just in weapons alone. I'm going to take melee out of here, because and other attacks, just because we covered it enough up there. You get kind of an idea of just the complexity of, even just in designing weapons. And then, the biggest challenge in designing all these weapons is that, you've got to balance it, right? It's got to be fun, both in whether it's single player or multiplayer, right? And then there are questions like, can NPCs and enemies use the same weapons and abilities, right? So, that's something else, like how you acquire weapons. Can you pick them up from an enemy? Can an enemy use your weapons, and those kinds of things? Do they have their own attacks that I have to get used to and whatever? So that's another important part of, one, reducing your work, and then, reducing the amount of time, things like that, and figuring out what goes into your weapon systems. But you got to know that this is also going to balance out, with your NPCs, your enemies, and things like that. How is that going to factor in, right? So that's something that's important, because you have to kind of figure out, like, how is, it's one thing to have a sniper rifle, for example, right? But, if I do, and the enemy's got a bunch of stuff that counters that, then my sniper rifle is useless. And so if I don't know what my skills and abilities are, my weapons and things like that, if I have to introduce the player, like, he might have his whole arsenal, and if the enemies have a whole another arsenal, that's something else, altogether, right? So just something to think about. So... all right, well, we're just down to a couple minutes here. If anybody's still awake and listening, please feel free to ask any questions. I'm hoping this is useful to you to try to understand, again, systemic game design and whatnot. Before I forget, again, next week, at the same time, there is going to be a virtual open day. You can enter to win a Wacom tablet, if you show up. So that's definitely worthwhile. So if you're watching this, this will be on July 27th. And again, no streaming for me next week. In fact, I will probably say that I will not be streaming on August 3rd as well, my birthday. So let's plan on, for those of you that are my regulars, we'll plan on being back on August 10th. So... there's a bunch of stuff here, about what you're going to do. Meet some awesome mentors, learn more about, like, how the school works, and learn all about the community, and things like that. So, and then, if you can't go live, if you can't be there live and you want to see this, make sure you register. You will be able to get a recording of it afterwards, so you will be able to watch this afterwards as well. So we can come to cgspectrum.com/open day. Again, this is 1 week from today, next week there. So make sure that you're there. I think this will especially be great for a lot of the artists and stuff that really want to figure out what it is. But at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is the exact same time that my weekly talk normally is. So anyways, and you'll be able to see, some works from the students and, and things like that. So again, let me post this into the channel here. So that should give you a link there to be able to, oops, just double checking that link went through. Yeah, so that should be in the chat channel there for anybody that doesn't remember it. So please check that out. And anyways, it's a challenge when, again, designing these combat systems. You can see that, again, we didn't get into movement very much, but in short, when you're combining these together with movement, can I move really fast? Do I move slow? Do I have heavy armor? Do I have light armor? So how I build out my character himself, and then how the weapon systems work, how I heal. All these things are really tightly integrated, and so it may sound like or seem like it's a much more a fairly simple system, but in reality, these systems are really deep, really complicated. There's a million different factors, hundreds of different stats, and then you have to figure out, again, categorize things, figure out how to understand, so that when I look at somebody like an enemy, I need to know, oh, he's big, he's tough. He's really slow moving though, and he fires really slow. And so therefore, I can use this tactic on him, or I can run up really close and knife him in the back, things like that. So you have to be thinking about what are my skills and abilities, my gear, my equipment, how much damage can I take? Where am I at? How much health do I currently have left? All these things are factors, in it that you really have to take into account for. So anyways, I think that's it for today. Hopefully, again, this gives you some insight into designing weapons and gives you a better sense for just, again, the depth and complexity of designing combat in your games. So take care, everybody. Have a great next 2 weeks, and we'll plan on seeing everybody back here on August 10th. So thanks, Big Glob. Yeah, shoulders getting there. It's getting a little bit better, although I was told today that I need to have surgery. So I don't know yet. We're still going to be getting some scans done this week on my shoulder and seeing what's going to happen and hoping I don't have to have surgery. So we'll see. Thanks, Alexios, and everybody else. And have a great week, guys, or great next 2 weeks. And we will see everybody again on August 10th. So have a good one, and especially be safe as the virus is out there and challenging everybody again. So thanks, Big Law. Appreciate it. So, be safe again out there. It's getting a little scary in the world. So take care, everybody. Have a good time. Bye.